This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Wonnarua people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
I kind of like the fact that out of the 120 plus producers here in the Hunter Valley, pretty well everyone is going to have at least one Semillon and one Shiraz, but I'm the only one that just totally focuses on those two varieties. So I guess it's my point of difference.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Andrew Thomas, more affectionately known as Thommo, is a personality in the Hunter Valley like no other. Known for his meticulous craftsmanship of Semillon and Shiraz, his brand Thomas Wines are a yardstick of quality in the region. Hi Thommo, thanks for joining me.
Hey Shanteh, how are you?
I'm really well. Thanks for making some time.
Thank you for the lovely intro.
Oh, it's all true, and I actually had you pegged as one of my first ever interviewees, but it's taken us this long to get here. But we're here finally.
That's nice to be here finally. Better later than never.
Yeah, exactly. Now tell me a little bit about your first memory of wine. I believe your father, Wayne Thomas, might have had something to do with that.
Yes, my father Wayne was a veteran winemaker, mostly in McLaren Vale for many, many years. He actually started in the Barossa Valley working under Peter Lehman back in the late 60s. And I was obviously very, very young then. So I guess my first memory of wine was when they eventually set up the first wine brand called Fernhill Estate. Some of your older listeners may remember that brand. It was based in McLaren Vale. We had a little property on Ingleby Road in McLaren Flat. And, I guess I don't, without sort of any sort of specific memories, I obviously recall sort of growing up amongst the wines and vines in McLaren Vale. Actually, I guess my first memory was when he worked at Ingleby Wines, which was just across the road from what eventually became Fernhill Estate, and that was he was working under the legendary Jim Ingleby back in those days. So, I remember. It was a very old historic winery, and there were rows and rows and rows of the large rectangular open wax line fermenters, and I remember each year all the tracks used to go down between the rows of fermenters. Because it was all thrown out, the skins were all thrown out over the top of these fermenters into open basket presses, and then the basket presses wheeled on these like little carriageways back to the sort of central location where the hydraulic operated ram came down and pressed them out, and then they get carried out outside, and the cages get lifted off, and all the dead, the pressed skins forked out onto a pile. And I kind of recall, maybe I was over there one day. I must have been 6 or 7 years old, and Dad got me on the job with a knife, poking all the skins that were caught between the slats in the basket press out. And I'm pretty sure I got 20 cents for my work that day. So, yeah, happy memories. And then obviously when they set up Fernhill Estate just across the road, when you're in the wine industry, and particularly, I guess, when your work is on the same property as where you live, you can't really escape it. It's just part of your life. I don't think I really thought too much about the wine industry back in those days. It was just part of the sort of the kids, everyday life, mum and dad would be up at the winery, either working or looking after cellar door, and that's just the way it was.
I always think about that because I think when you are so young and you don't really appreciate, the joys of wine, is it just that, they're just kind of farmers and then they just work a lot? Was that your impression of what they did?
Pretty much, yeah. There's particularly, back in those days, there was probably, I'm taking a guess here, and we're talking sort of early mid-70s, there was probably 20 brands in the whole of McLaren Vale. So the industry was much smaller than it is today. But regardless of whether it's 50, 60 years ago or today, when you're operating a small business in the wine industry, you tend to be jack of all trades. You do everything, and you work your butt off to try and make a living. And so mum and dad were always working, but the house was sort of just down behind the winery, so they weren't too far away. And we'd pop up to the winery if we needed something, and it's just the way life was. It was good, living in the country certainly has its benefits. So yeah, it was happy upbringing.
Well, lots of fresh air, which is always really nice. Do you remember the first time you ever kind of got a buzz off wine, or the first time maybe you got more than a buzz, the first time you kind of actually drank a glass of wine, and whether or not you liked it or didn't like it?
We were encouraged to have a taste of wine around the dinner table when we were young, but it wasn't something that I particularly looked forward to every day. It was just, I think from memory, I think we might even have whatever mum and dad were drinking, they'd give us a little glass diluted with a bit of water, which is obviously pretty horrible. But look, I do recall, I think it might have been in my last year of high school. I was doing some casual work, waxing some tanks in a winery in McLaren Vale called Middlebrook. And the winemaker there at the time, her name was Carolyn Burston. And I've, despite having grown up around wines and vines all my life, I really knew very little about wine or wine tasting. And anyway, we happened to be sitting down for lunch one day, and she brought out a bottle of, believe it or not, Sauvignon Blanc, but it was from Sancerre. And I still remember just being absolutely blown away by these flavours that I'd never actually experienced before. And, if I had to put my finger on a point that got me more seriously interested in the wine industry, I reckon that might have been the day. It was, I can't remember what the label was, but I just do remember being quite blown away and making quite a fuss over like how amazing this wine was, when I was, I don't know, I guess I was 16 or 15 or 16 years old. So mate, it's funny the things you remember, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that Sauvignon Blanc is kind of a perfect first wine because there's so many recognisable aromatics in it, like you see so much vibrancy and spectrum of fruit. And so I can see that as like someone young, that could be like, whoa, what is this? What's going on in this glass? Where, so I can see that would be a wine that would kind of pique your interest. So did you decide you wanted to be a winemaker and follow in your dad's footsteps, or did you go off and try to be a footballer or something first?
Oh, I would have loved to be a footballer. I did play footy, but never quite good enough to crack the big league. But look, to be honest with you, I really wasn't that interested in pursuing a career in the wine industry right up until the end of my high school years. Prior to that, I had probably more disillusions of becoming a musician, and much to my grandparents' dismay more than anything else, because they they're always in my ear like it's very hard to make a career out of music, and of course when you're young you don't want to hear anything like that. But it did get to the point where I kind of realised that, I was okay at what I was doing, but I kind of realised that I probably didn't quite have the talent to really make it. And that's when, I was doing a bit of work at a local winery at the time. I started to focus my attention more at the wine industry and see if it was a serious possibility for my future career path. So, look, when I finished high school, I applied for a position at Roseworthy to do my degree and in winemaking, and I was obviously accepted for that. Not that you need massive marks back in those days to get an enrolment in the winemaking degree at Roseworthy, but I decided to take a year off between high school and starting that, and I wanted to work as a sale hand in a winery in McLaren Vale, just to make sure that it's really what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to go straight out of high school, spend 3 years doing a degree, and then come out and realise it's something that I wasn't really that passionate about. So I did that. I deferred for that 12 months, and it was clear to me through that gap year, if you like, that I really enjoyed it. I'd grown up in the industry, so we have a lot of friends in the industry, family friends. So I knew this industry quite well. I enjoyed the work. I knew I had a lot to learn, but I was young and had plenty of time up my sleeve, so decided to go ahead with it and went to Roseworthy that year later, and the rest is history.
Came out a better person because of it, no doubt.
Yeah, look, I think that, and I guess the other thing too is having, I guess, grown up in the industry to an extent, but also having that year of actual practical application in the winery. I think, looking back now, it probably gave me a little bit of an advantage over those that had just gone straight into that course with no connection to the wine industry at all, because you have although there's a lot of technical and scientific detail that they teach at Roseworthy, but at least if you've actually had the practical application in a winery, you kind of understand what you're learning is understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And that really sort of cemented the whole thing for me once I started that learning process at Roseworthy and having that grown up in the industry and having that 12 months of work prior to going into it, it really cemented for me that this is something that could be a lot of fun as a long-term career.
Now, why did you end up feeling drawn to the Hunter? Because McLaren Vale is a beautiful place in the world, close to the coast. It's got a nude beach not far. I mean, why did you feel drawn to the Hunter?
Look, the short answer is I was offered a job in the Hunter Valley. In your last year at Roseworthy back in those days, the first term or semester, part of the course was go out and you do a vintage somewhere in the industry and then, write a report on it as part of your assessment. And I actually did 2 vintages that year as part of my course. So the first part was I went up and did a vintage with John Cassegrain up in Port Macquarie. This is 1986. And then, with the time differences in vintage, I actually ended up going and doing another vintage back in the Barossa at Bazadow Wines, which, that label doesn't exist anymore, but Doug Lehman, the late Doug Lehman, was at the helm back in those days. So 2 very different vintages, and they were both fantastic. But look, during my time at Cassegrain, John Cassegrain was an ex-Tyrrell's winemaker, and this was 1986. And the Hunter had a lot of rain heading its way, and Murray Tyrrell was in a bit of a panic. and was looking around for some extra workers to try and get a whole heap of fruit in before this big rain event was coming on. So he rang Cassie to ask if he had any spare hands that he could send down for a week or two, and Cassie mentioned that I was there, and so they sent me down. I worked my butt off for a couple of weeks. I think if there's one thing that my parents taught me more than anything other was work ethic. That's small business sort of stuff, I suppose. But I worked my butt off, and later on that year, back in South Australia at Roseworthy, someone had left Tyrrell's, and I'd obviously impressed enough during my couple of weeks there that they got in touch with me and asked what my plans were because I was in my final year, and then they offered me a job as an assistant winemaker. So I didn't really know much about the Hunter. In fact, being a true blue South Australian, I was born with this extra little piece of DNA in my personality, that you basically, as a South Australian, you're born with this natural distaste and dislike of the Hunter Valley, even though you don't know much about it, because particularly growing up in South Australia, it's the home and the Barossa Valley, home of these big, full-bodied, dense wines, and a lot of South Australians don't understand the beauty and finesse of more sort of light and medium-bodied styles of Shiraz, myself included. But anyway, Tyrrell's, they're, to this very day, they're an absolutely fantastic company, and I figured that'd be a great start to my career. So I accepted the job. No real long-term plans. In fact, I kind of recall thinking that probably, 2 or 3 or 4 years at Tyrrell's, at the end of which I'd probably head back and take a job somewhere in South Australia. And that was 37 years ago. And here I am still here. So I don't know, it's not hard to explain, really. I credit the Tyrrell family with a lot of the reason I stayed here. I ended up making wine for Tyrrell's for 13 years. And during that time, Murray Tyrrell was alive back in those days, and of course Bruce. I worked alongside Andrew Spinnersy, that whole 13 years I was there. And, the Tyrrell family are very passionate, multi-generational Hunter Valley wine producers. And they, I guess, Murray had a lot to do with it. He just really, really instilled a passion within me for the Hunter styles, and particularly with Semillon and Shiraz, and they really made me understand that quality is not related at all to sheer weight and power, particularly when talking reds, even whites. It's more about sort of internal structural beauty and integrity, and that's what, in the very best years, the Hunter Valley has in spades. And, granted, we certainly have some challenging vintages here in the Hunter from time to time when we have a bit of, mid-late summer rainfall. But contrary to most South Australians' belief, that doesn't happen every year. It happens to varying degrees from time to time, and occasionally we have a really wet one, which is extremely challenging. But most of the time, the conditions up here, because our vintage is a bit earlier, are conducive to making great wine, and in the very best years, the wines we produce up here are absolutely world-class.
Yep, I would definitely concur with that. I want to touch on what you were talking about a little bit with the style of wines made in the Hunter. I think, like you said, depending on where you're from, whether you drink Hunter wines or not, it's hard to deny just the quality that comes from the region. But I want to talk about a little bit about Semillon and Shiraz and the beauty of those wines, because I think that if somebody's driving out to the Hunter and they've never been out there before, they're probably going up for some wonderful concert and they think, you know what, I'm going to just go and try the wines. Tell me about what you love about Semillon and what you love about Shiraz, and why should somebody choose to drink those two wines?
How much time have we got?
I know, right? Start, here's a better question. That was a terrible question. Start with this one. Semillon is a wonderful white wine. Often, people say it's a great white wine to go with, say, seafood. Why is Semillon a better choice than, say, perhaps picking something like Verdelho?
Look, it all comes down to personal taste to start with, I guess. But look, one of the things I love about Semillon, and this is really nothing to do with the actual taste of the wine and why it's such a fantastic drink, is that nowhere else in the world produces Semillon quite like the Hunter Valley. It's the style produced here is very unique to our region, and it's something that we're very proud of. All the WSET students and MW students around the world, if there's one thing they have to know about Australian wine, it's Hunter Semillon. That's because it's so unique. So why choose Hunter Sem? It's very versatile, and I think perhaps something that your listeners may not, those that haven't been drinking Hunter Sem for a little while may not realise, is that the very traditional style of Hunter Semillon, which was picked very, very early, and is arguably so lean and austere that perhaps was often referred to as battery acid. We don't really do those styles anymore. We've got a much better handle on viticulture these days, and to an extent, changes in the way that we're doing things in the winery, that we're pushing for that extra level of ripeness to try and provide young Hunter Semillon with some beautiful drinkability and generosity. We're still talking about a very, very delicate style. For the listeners that don't realise, Hunter Sem, we achieve beautiful fruit and phenological ripeness at relatively low sugar levels, which therefore correspond to relatively low alcohol levels. So most Hunter Sems are going to be somewhere in the range of 10 or 10.5% alcohol to 11.5. There's a few that are sort of outside that range, but that's pretty much the average. And because of our quite unique ancient soils and our quite unique climate for growing grapes, we even at those low sugar levels, we've got a beautiful balance of acidity. And whilst it's, I wouldn't even say elevated, it's at a level where that beautiful line of acidity, which is so important to Hunter Sem, and part of what makes it so such a beautiful match with delicate fresh seafood. Whilst that acidity is there, it's not. I would imagine that almost every single white wine produced in Tasmania and probably a lot out of Victoria would have higher, like actual measurable levels of acidity. But Hunter Semillon has a very low pH. I don't want to get too technical here, but it's the low pH and that moderate level of acidity that gives the perception of that lovely piercing line of acidity. And that's partly what gives our wines their longevity, but also contributes to that beautiful structure that makes the wine so beautiful with fresh seafood. The other thing just quickly about Hunter Sem is, when we think of cellaring wine, most people will automatically default straight to red wine, but Hunter Semillon is one of those white varieties in the world that has, in certain cases, absolutely remarkable longevity. The very best examples of Hunter Sem can potentially evolve in the cellar for decades. And I really do love that part about Hunter Sem. It's probably the thing that the Hunter's most famous for around the world is our bottle age examples of Hunter Sem. So, it all comes down to personal taste. If you enjoy that really fresh, vibrant, varietal, pure and precise style of Hunter Sem, best to drink it in the first year or two. But if you prefer some of that toasty, lightly brown buttered toast complexities to come through with some bottle age, you need to wait at least 5 or 6 years for those lovely complexities to emerge. And as I say, the best examples just continue to evolve over the next 5, 10, 20 plus years beyond. And that's obviously something that we as a community of winemakers in the Hunter Valley are very proud of.
You said that so well. And, what I love about Sem is that we don't look to anybody else in the world. Like you said, we're not looking to France to say, how do they do Semillon? We are the leaders. And like you said, no one else makes Semillon the way that Australia does. And it is at the top of the food chain. The other thing I love is that there is whether you had drink those almost watery white, young, youthful Semillons or something that's beautifully aged, looking, upwards of 20 years, there's always so much flavour in every sip. I find it really hard to deny for any other white wine in the world if there can be that much flavour in those two spectrums of, whether it be, in its teenage years or if it's older or if it's bright and young, there is just so much going on in each glass. And I think for what we charge for it, you really can't get better value for money.
I agree. I totally agree. And it is quite paradoxical that such a fine, delicate, pure and precise style of wine can, even as a youngster, can have so much intensity and concentration. And again, I go back to that thing that quality is more about sort of internal structural complexity and beauty than anything else. It's the way that all the components of the wine fit in with each other. And top end young Hunter Sem just has this energy. And that's probably the best way to describe it. Yes, it is a very delicate style of wine, but the best examples just have this sort of this energy that's kind of hard to describe why you're getting so much intensity from such a delicate wine. But it is that energy and the way that all the the acidity and all the components of the wine work together to just make it an absolutely compelling style of white wine.
Now, in 1997, you established Thommo Wines. What was the aim at the start? How do you go about going, I'm going to release my own wines? What do they offer that's not already on the market? How do you go about that, and what was your aim?
1997, I was still at Tyrrell's at that stage, and over the last couple of years, I kind of had the itch to do something, with my own label, and I actually caught Murray and Bruce in the same office one day, and I've been thinking about it a long time, and I knew I needed to run it by them, so I plucked up the courage to go and have a chat with them. And look, I can't say they were thrilled with the idea, but they weren't going to say no. The only stipulations were that I couldn't do it there at Tyrrell's, had to be done off-site somewhere else, and don't forget your day job, which is all very fair enough. So the first 3 vintages, 97, 8, 9, that's right, I made in one of my mates' wineries, our Sutherland at Capicale. He was very helpful to me early in my career. But to answer your question, by that stage, when I think of the Hunter, we grow all the varieties up here, like every region of the world. In Australia, everything grown. But I guess our main varieties, in my opinion, it's pretty widely regarded that Semillon and Shiraz are the signature varieties of our region. And I don't know, when I'm, the Tyrrells had obviously instilled a great passion for Hunter wine, but particularly these two varieties in me. And you know what? I don't even know why I went down that track, because clearly from the outset, if I was producing a wider, a more diverse range of wines to offer, potentially could have been selling more wine. But to me, from the very outset, I just decided, made a very committed decision just to focus on these two varieties of the Hunter Valley. And I guess it was more about long-term integrity over short-term commercial compromise. And I've stuck with that, to this very day. And again, if I had a Verdelho and some alternative red varieties and other bits and pieces in my range, I'm sure I could possibly sell a bit more wine. But I kind of like the fact that out of the 120 plus producers here in the Hunter Valley, pretty well everyone is going to have at least one Sem and one Shiraz, but I'm the only one that just totally focuses on those two varieties. So I guess it's my point of difference. Clearly, if you're going to go down that path, you need to be producing wines that are sort of amongst the top of what's coming out of the region. And regardless of how good a winemaker you are, that all comes down to having access to the best quality grapes. So that was probably the most important thing that I focused on, not just in those early days, to this very day, is finding the vineyards that can provide me with the fruit to produce top end examples of Hunter Valley Sem and Shiraz.
Yeah, I love that you only offer those two varieties. I imagine if you had, an accountant or a marketing person, they would definitely be encouraging you to make a rosé or something else. But I like that you've stuck to your guns. Tell me about working with...
I do have an accountant and a marketing person. They're me.
And that's why you haven't been cajoled into producing...
Yeah, look, my cellador, like my partner Kim and those guys in cellador every year are like, come on, let's have a rosé. And I'm just like, the more they ask, the more I refuse. I just don't want to jump on that bandwagon. Yeah. And look, to me, I guess I like the analogy with what I do. It's kind of that Burgundian approach. So, when people taste our range, when you go to Burgundy, pretty much you get Chardonnay, and they grow Chardonnay and they grow Pinot Noir. And then most of the producers, whichever variety or maybe both they focus on, there's the different tiers of quality. So they've got their the vineyards that are surround the village wines, the vineyards on the flats there surround the villages. They're, I guess, for want of a better word, entry-level wines. And then, as you go up the hill, top and bottom, you've got your Premier Cru, and then you've got those little strips of Grand Cru examples of just those two varieties. And, my range is structured similarly. I've got basically just focusing on Semillon and Shiraz, but I've got different qualities at different price points. And I kind of like that, not that I'm calling myself a Burgundian producer, but I just love that approach that Burgundy applies. And it's really quite simple at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you want to reflect, what you're working with. And to that point, I want to talk a little bit about your Braymore vineyard and also the Shiraz offerings as well. I probably would say, I could pick a Braymore Semillon out of a bracket of Semillons, and I could probably pick a Sweetwater Shiraz over the Kiss Shiraz in a lineup as well. Tell me about the importance of site selection in your wines. Very important for anyone making wine anywhere, really. But certainly when you've got a wine business that's focused just on two varieties within a region, stylistic diversity is really important. If all the wines tasted the same, it would kind of defeat the purpose of the exercise. So absolutely of paramount importance, and even more so over the years as my range of single vineyard Sem and Shiraz has grown, that people can actually see and easily identify the subtle nuances that each of these individual sites provide to the wines.
So, look, a bit of a generalisation, I guess, but generally speaking, in the hunter, the whites, particularly Sem, are generally grown on the lower lying sandy loam alluvial flats, and the reds on the darker, heavier soils. And I think it's fair to say that most of the classic hunter Sems, the ones that you and most people will know of, are generally grown on those lighter soils, as is Braymore. Braymore is a vineyard that's very close to my heart. Obviously, it was planted in 1969, so it's a bit over 50 years old now. And it sits pretty much right in the middle of it's like a 2.5 kilometre strip of, it's an ancient watercourse that's been silted up with this really silty sandy loam alluvial soil over, the last 10 million years or so. That whole strip is pretty well planted all out to white, and very much the majority of the plantings are Semillon. Tyrrells have got quite a bit of land along that strip as well. They've got a bit of Chardonnay there, but obviously HVD Semillon, that's one block over from Braymore. And, I kind of like to think of it as the Grand Cru strip of soil for Semillon in the Hunter Valley. Others may disagree, but it certainly produces some fantastic Sems each year. And look, I'm glad that you mentioned that you can more or less pick out Braymore in a blind line of young Hunter Sems, because and it's true of that whole strip. I think Tyrrell's HVD has got similar attributes, that it's a beautiful each way bet. So as a young wine, Sems from that strip have this extra level of generosity, still within that very pure and precise, delicate frame, but they've just got that extra level of intensity and concentration and generosity, which I think that is a real positive, particularly for those that like to drink Hunter Semillon in its youth. But at the same time, it has that internal structural complexity and beauty to provide some great longevity. So I put away a few hundred cases of Braymore each year, sell it myself, so that those that don't have their own cellars don't miss out on the opportunity to see this this marvellous and amazing transformation that happens. And so I re-release it with 6 years bottle age, and from that point, it's up to the people that are buying that bottle aged Braymore to decide for themselves whether they take it home and drink it that night because it's bloody delicious, or whether they put it down and continue cellaring themselves for the next decade or so. To my mind, Braymore really hits its straps at about 10 years and beyond. That's when it's really starting to show its true form. I love it.
I love it too, and I think that they should do both. They should buy some for drinking now, and they should buy another case for putting down in their cellar.
The clever ones do, that's right, because obviously there's always going to be a premium attached to the stuff that we've had to put down ourselves. The clever ones buy it at the young one at today's prices and reap the benefits a few years down the track. The reds, I just love Hunter Shiraz, and I love top end Hunter Shiraz. We've got each year, in a good year, most years, I'll release 9 individual labels of Shiraz, and they each have their own subtle, diverse personality, and to be honest with you, when people ask me about my winemaking and sort of how things have changed over the years, it's quite interesting, well, for me anyway, because over the last 20 years, particularly in the last 10 years, I've probably taken a much more hands-off approach than I was applying back in the early days, in the mid noughties. And apart from the fact that we don't need to try and push boundaries and try and force hunter wines to be bigger than perhaps they should be anymore. It's more about, as I've found new and struck relationships with growers that have these amazing vineyards. It's really important for me to, whilst my house style will sit across all of these wines, it's really important for me to let the vineyard do the talking and for the vineyard to be able to provide that unique sense of place and personality that says I'm from this place rather than the hand of the winemaker. So things like, we're not pushing for that higher level of ripeness any more than perhaps we were in the early noughties. We're not working the ferments as hard. We're de-stemming, but not crushing the grapes. We're using much less new oak than I was 15, 20 years ago. I don't use any tannins anymore. So, all in an effort to all these amazing vineyards that we're fortunate enough to have access to really shine through. And what you get, and I think, KISS is obviously our inverted commas Grand Cru, making reference to my Burgundian analogy before, but Sweetwater, it's, I describe that as one of my premier crus, but it is one of the most distinctive wines in our range, and that's because of where it comes from. That vineyard's in the northern part of the Lower Hunter, a little sub-region we call Belford. Up there we have deposits of limestone, and we have this beautiful red loamy soil with bits of ironstone through it on top, and it has this really distinctive floral element to it amongst all those lovely red and blue fruits we see in modern Hunter Shiraz. And I guess the common thread across all of these wines, not just mine, but really good Hunter Shiraz in general, is we have this lovely medium bodied weight to our wines. It's not all about sheer weight and power. It's the wines are, they sit in a spectrum of medium bodiedness, and there's some in the lighter end, there's some in the fuller end, but at the end of the day, Hunter Shiraz is and should be medium bodied in weight, and we have our tannins and our lovely acidity that we have in Hunter Shiraz provide a lovely savoury texture to our wines, as distinct from, let's say, that sweeter, fleshy texture that you get in South Australian wines. So inherently food friendly, delicious as youngsters, and like our Sems, the best examples, have quite remarkable longevity and just bloody delicious.
You got that right, and I'm such a sucker for that Sweetwater Shiraz. It's just so alluring. I can't, it's kind of like I don't know, when you get that pheromone of somebody you love, you're like, oh, you just swoon for it. And that's how I feel about the Sweetwater Shiraz. You mentioned earlier Kim. So your wonderful partner is the wildly talented sommelier extraordinaire Kim Bickley. What did her background in wine add to your brand?
She's got a terrific palate, of course. So, it never hurts to have more and more people looking at your wines. And look, she doesn't know this yet, but I'm about to give her her latest job of writing some tasting notes for me on all our 21 red releases. And she's really good at it. She's got a beautiful way of describing wine, and I kind of like removing myself from that. Obviously, I'll put my own 2 bobs worth in, but it's kind of cool having someone that's not intimately involved in the day-to-day winemaking of the wines but at the same time understands the wines, understands the vineyards, just to write, if nothing else, some keywords to incorporate into your taste notes. So because, for me, I'm kind of going to be writing the same thing, within reason every year, because I see the vineyard as providing this style more so than the individual descriptors in the wine. So she's fantastic for that. Just as a sounding board. We run a small business here, so there's lots of decisions to be made every day. And whilst she's not fully ensconced in the business on a day-to-day basis, obviously all the decisions made affect all the things we do. So she's wonderful at that. She's well connected within the on-premise trade, so that certainly doesn't hurt. Getting good seats at restaurants, that's always handy. And look, Kim does lots of things. She's pretty busy. She's obviously we have a 7-year-old child, Jackson, who's just awesome. So she's kind of a full-time mum there. She is a guest palate on a couple of tasting panels that happen here in the Hunter Valley in Newcastle. So, a bit like anyone in small business, there's never enough hours in the day, particularly when you've got a 7-year-old in the house. But she's awesome, as you well know.
I do. And I think we might have to pick that conversation up with Kim and hear a little bit more about all the other things she does. But lovely to hear from your perspective as well. So I'm at that point now where I need to ask you about, if you could only drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life and why. I think a lot of people out there may know some of them from you, but I'd love to hear it from the horse's mouth. What are you going to drink?
I'm going to leave wine to the end because we all need wine to survive as well. So my first of 3 beverages that I couldn't do without is beer, because I love a cleansing ale at the end of the day. And you're going to ask me what kind of beer, aren't you? And you're going to hope I'm going to be quoting some fancy craft beer, but that's definitely not the case for me. I don't mind some crafty beers, but to be honest with you, a lot of them are they're a bit like a lot of the lo-fi wines that have been made over the years. They're just not very nice. Excuse me, and I'm just not a huge fan of those really fruity tropical hops beers. So sometimes, look, we're tasting wine, often all day, every day. Sometimes I just feel like something as inane as a Peroni at the end of the day that really doesn't have a lot of flavour. It's more of a sessional beer, and it's just something I can drink, enjoy the taste of without having to actually taste it and think about it. So you can put me down for a pallet of Peroni. That should get me through, maybe not the rest of my life, but next couple of months. Next one, I'm going to move to spirits. And I don't really drink a lot of spirits. I'll have the occasional gin and tonic. What are you laughing at? But I am partial to the odd rum, and I'm not talking Bundaberg. I'm talking like sort of top shelf, barrel-aged rums that are more sort of, brandy balloon appreciation than, throwing down a shot. I wouldn't say I'm an aficionado, but I've got quite a few rums in my collection. In fact, just on this last Saturday night, I was in a pub in Newcastle. It was a 50th birthday, and we spotted a bottle of Diplomatico Ambassador. Do you know it?
I do know it.
It was pretty tasty.
I've only had it like once, I think, though.
It was pretty. I mean, look, there are a lot of really, fantastic smaller producer rum from all over the world. I'm pretty sure this is a fairly decent production, but it's it's been barrel matured for a very long time. It kind of sits alongside, I guess, that Zacapa XO. We had my Julius and I had a nip of that each. We just couldn't resist it. $58 a nip, I think it was. It was pretty tasty. So I'll have a pallet of of top shelf rum to go alongside my pallet of Peroni. And then last but not least, wine. You know what? I'll drink anything if it's good. I'm not interested in drinking wine for the sake of, of drinking wine. I want to enjoy good wine. Life's too short, all of that sort of jazz to drink bad wine, the whole thing. But if you had to narrow me down, and it would get really boring just drinking one style or one region across the world. I'm not even going to pick the Hunter, which is a bit too obvious. I'm going to, if I've got to pick a region around the world as my, I'm not going to say my deathbed because I'd probably choose something else, but something I just love drinking a lot of is Chablis. And we drink a fair bit of Chablis in this house, and I just love it. It's whilst it's getting more expensive. I think as the price of Burgundy, Côte d'Or, Burgundy, it gets more and more expensive and out of the reach of a lot of people. And perhaps with climate change and Chablis warming up a little bit, a lot of people are turning to Chablis, which obviously increased demand, increases prices. So, but they're still relatively inexpensive, and I just love them. It's one of those things I see, despite the fact that we've got a very distinct varietal difference here between Hunter Semillon and Chablis, which is obviously Chardonnay. I see a stylistic similarity between wines made from these two regions, and I think it's a lot of the Chablis wines are unwooded or lightly wooded, and the best examples from the best vintages have that lovely pure line of acidity, but of course they're Chardonnay, so completely different, but just delicious, particularly in summer. Just absolutely the best examples are absolutely fantastic. I love them.
It actually doesn't surprise me that much that you said that, because a bit like Sam, you can really see, all the distinct vineyards in the wine. You have a nice spectrum of kind of looking at, some of those Grand Cru and the more powerful wines, but then the really delicate mineral-driven stuff. So it doesn't surprise me. And I think 3 excellent drinks. I now know case of Peroni Red, a little bit of barrel-aged rum, and a Chablis, and you're a happy man.
Give me a Raveneau Clos. I'll be forever in your debt, Shanteh.
Doesn't ask for much. Thommo, it's been such a dream. Thank you for making the time to chat with me. It's been a long time coming, and it's always such a pleasure to hear a little bit about what you're up to.
It's my absolute pleasure. It's been great talking with you. Thanks a lot.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.